everyone, to Talking Back to Suicide. This is one of your hosts, Dr. Diane Kaufman, although I like to be called Dr. Diana for my creative self. I'm a poet, artist, humanism and medicine awardee, a retired adult and child psychiatrist, and I'm the founder director of the Hold On campaign for suicide prevention that uses the power of art to educate, connect, express, and heal. And my co host is Kino Isaac, coming to us from South Africa. And Kino is a DJ, music producer, entrepreneur, and most importantly, an advocate for the mental health of independent artists. And I'd like to introduce to you, for our guest today, our special guest, my friend and creative colleague, Karen Corona, who is a licensed clinical social worker, heart healing coach, author, and founder of Creative Heart Awakenings. Karen has over 2 decades of experience helping individuals heal from the effects of childhood relational trauma, family dysfunction, emotional neglect, and narcissistic abuse. Licensed in both Oregon and California, she integrates expressive arts therapy, internal family systems, and recovery principles to support core emotional healing and transformation. In 2024, Karen published her book, Heart Healing for Radiant Living, and she developed her Heart Healing Signature Program, a coaching process inspired by her own healing journey and years of clinical experience. Through her work, Karen helps people to release emotional pain in order to embody more joy, freedom, and abundance in their lives. She believes that healing is always possible, and her own mental health journey is a testament to this as she has navigated the darkness to now embrace the light. Welcome, Karen, so much to Talking Back to Suicide. And we're just so happy that you could join us today.
Yeah, thank you, Diane and Kino. I'm really happy to be here.
So, you've shared, and I've shared with that introduction, that your mental health journey has been, of course, your own lived experience, and you're using that now to help others. Could you start wherever you'd like to in terms of what that mental health journey has been like for you?
Yeah, I think one thing I'd like to highlight is how art has been instrumental in my own healing. So I was seeing a counselor in college and dealing with depression at the time, and did get hospitalized actually on my 21st birthday for suicidal ideation and just really struggling with the darkness of this depression. It has been definitely a part of my journey. And in that hospitalization, it was a psychiatric hospitalization, so inpatient psych. And one of the things that just kind of drew me was this art therapy room. And I was so shut down that it was hard to connect with other people. There were therapists and there's treatment team providers, case managers, and it just was really hard to connect that way. And so I went into the art room and I did some woodworking. I made like this bench. So using my hands and creativity. And then there were some groups that focused on using creativity for healing purposes. So that really was a marker for me on using creative expression to heal. It's a creative lifeline that has been threaded throughout my mental health journey.
When you were a young girl, were there creative people, artistic people in your life that may have had an influence on you?
I would say my ma- yeah, my maternal grandmother, she was creative in the sense that she was a pianist. So she played piano, she composed song Rondoletto that was published by the Boston Music Company, but she also wrote poetry. So she had a very creative kind of heart. And at the age of 5, for each of her 7 grandchildren, she wrote a little bit about each of us. And so when I have saved that, I think it's actually in my book in the intro. And basically, it's saying, Karen loves to do anything with her hands. She loves lace, finding things in nature, gluing things together, and she's like a happy camper when she's doing that. So, yeah, my creative kind of heart, threads back to when I was really young. I didn't have anyone in my family of origin, but I did have access to like art supplies. I did sewing and I sewed a Winnie the Pooh. I still have it in it and I embroidered on the Pooh. So I was always doing, like craft projects or that. And in 6th grade, I have 2 younger sisters. My younger sister, her friends, I did an art camp for them. So the neighborhood kids and her friends came to the backyard and I had a can and they each paid 50 cents. And then I had an art thing table set up in the backyard and every day for a week did different art projects. And so I can see, often threads to our life purpose dates back to passions or what, just there's threads back to that in terms of the work I'm doing now.
I'm thinking of your grandmother and how I think how necessary it is to have reflected back to us who we are, right? Like a mirror shining back, and she was showing you the abundance and creativity within you. And didn't you do something incorporating some of her work on the cover of your book?
Yeah, I so the piece that she had published, here's my book, but
Uh-huh.
I this in the corner is her music. It's called Rondoletto. It talks about like walking hand in hand with your partner and yeah, and so this is kind of symbolism, of my grandmother and her creative spirit. That's her music that she composed.
Beautiful. And the image on the cover, is that a lotus? And a heart coming out of the lotus?
Yeah, so the logo for Creative Heart Awakenings is the lotus flower, and it represents kind of awakening to your authentic self in the healing journey. And there's something interesting about lotus. They grow, in the mud, right? And it's like that's often how we grow in transformation, right? In the mud and the messiness of our lives. How do we grow into opening to our true authentic self?
I want us later also to talk more about your book, right? Which is really a daily guide or a daily, weekly guide for a year or more. But I wanted to return to your mental health journey. So you were 21 when there was a first psychiatric admission, and that was related to depression. Yes?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. And what were, if you can recall, what were the symptoms that you were having of depression?
So it's been very similar throughout the years, in dealing with depression and mood disorder. But for me, it looked like a lot of hypersomnia. So, like wanting to sleep and just kind of in a way go unconscious, or just, like, so that's a big piece the hypersomnia, sleeping, not wanting to get out of bed, low motivation, the hallmark of depression, like anhedonia. So things that normally like would connect me to a sense of aliveness, like art or connecting with a friend, that just falls flat. And anhedonia is a big part of what I experience when I've had the depression, and that it has been accompanied by suicidal ideation oftentimes as well. So low motivation, hypersomnia, kind of an apathy, fatigue. They also talk about clinically psychomotor retardation. It's like a
Retardation.
yeah, it's like a slowing, like just feeling like I'm just walking through molasses. Like an oppressive kind of energy that kind of comes over me.
Was that the first time you had some of those symptoms, in your 2021, or did it go back into younger or teenage years?
Definitely went back into my teenage years. I think starting around the age of 13, which is actually when I first started to have suicidal ideation. Throughout my high school years, I experienced quite a bit of significant depression. And I'm starting to understand that I had a strong achiever part, if that makes sense. So I had a strong achiever part. So that part held a lot of perfectionism, some of the OCD kind of tendencies of having my environment in a certain way. And with that achiever part, what would happen for me is I something would happen where I wasn't perfect, okay? And this part would feel completely defeated. And so if that makes sense. So and the reason I understand today that the reason that this achiever part would feel so defeated is I unconsciously believe that if I could be perfect and achieve enough, I would get what I needed emotionally from my family of origin to feel accepted, to feel approved of, the emotional validation so that I could feel loved, feel loved. It's different than knowing, okay, an intellect, like to actually feel loved. So that's what the energy that's been around a lot of my, trying to get something emotionally from this achiever part. And so when I was 13, I do remember I was at a pool party, swimming, party, and I had just gotten word that I on a grade for a class. I think it was like an A minus or a B plus. And that was failing to, in terms of my perfection standards. And so no one could really understand it, but internally that was failing. And so the despair comes in because it's like, I'm not going to get what I emotionally need. I don't know if this is making sense, but this
Yes,
is
it is.
through my
Yeah.
healing work. So that achiever part would be totally flattened and collapsed, feeling defeated. Now, an adult part can say, it was a B plus, right? But this is my internal system that came to believe if I could be perfect and get like that meant like all A's, I was homecoming queen, I was this, student body secretary, I was doing all this achievement oriented stuff. But the energy behind it was to secure something emotionally. And so when I would have a mistake, or there'd be criticism, or there would be failure to meet my perfectionistic standards, this achiever part would collapse into a pretty profound depression. And I think it's tied to my relational trauma from attachment way early. Is that making
Yeah, it
sense?
does. Yes. And
Yeah.
did did your perfectionism go into your physical appearance or your weight or anything like that as well? It may or may not have, but I'm just curious.
Absolutely. So I had what I call so the achiever part is a protector, right? Like I'm trying to get something to secure emotional needs. So I definitely had a very strong appearance protector. If I could look a certain way and be pretty enough, then I would feel loved. And so, yeah, that came out. I had pretty disordered eating in college. I didn't have a full blown eating disorder, but I was, well, I don't know, might have been considered. Was using laxatives quite a bit to try and lose weight. And yeah, so there was quite a bit around, if I was made fun of for a certain thing in terms of my body or my body image, I would try and alter it in different ways. And so, yeah, definitely it was achievement and appearance.
You were young in your teens and experiencing this. Um, and I think I already know the answer, but I wanna ask you, were you aware, like, "Wait a minute, I'm thinking about this incorrectly," or were you merged with those kinds of thoughts?
Yeah, I was merged. I was completely yeah, there was no like in ACA, adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families, it's becoming your own loving parent. So when we don't have an internalized experience of a loving, kind of nurturing parent, it's hard to access that. And so my inner teen and my inner child did the best they could, but I was completely identified and merged. And so there was no part of me with it was like, you're doing such a good job. I mean, look at
Yeah, like, don't be so hard on yourself. Yeah.
no, I had no access to that. No
And
access, no internal access and no external access.
was there anyone in the family, or I'd even say a teacher, who noticed something was not okay, despite the exterior, right, glimmer, right, of your achievements that internally you were suffering? Did anyone pick up on that?
Well, in elementary school, I was extremely shy and highly sensitive. So I'm an empath. I have a highly, like the highly sensitive person, HSP. And so I was very sensitive to teachers that were more like hard-edged around things, and got attached to my second grade teacher, Mrs. Lewis, who was just kind and gentle. And will say that is it in seventh or eighth grade, I think one of my parents, I don't know, actually, I ended up seeing the school counselor. And it was because I was staying up like till 2 a.m. working on homework. And that's when the OCD part came in. So it was severe, the OCD. So I would take notes, and if the edge of the paper got dog-eared, I'd have to go to 7-Eleven and make a zero copy of it. I had to like vacuum my bedroom rug and no one could step on it. Like I had all these OCD rituals around perfection, even of my environment. And so I think my parents were like, you're working, they did kind of notice that I was staying up really late and working really hard on homework. And so I went to the school counselor. But, trauma therapist, I mean, has so evolved over the years because this is so many years ago. I'm in my 50s now. And so I think there was a looking to external visible factors that would have been creating this OCD, depression, right? Is there an alcoholic parent? Is there divorce? Is there, and there was none of that. The type of trauma I experienced was more attachment relationship based and desperately wanting an emotional connection with a caregiver that was just, there was no access to. And also being the family scapegoat as an empath and a firstborn, I absorbed the feelings for the family and was almost like a shame scapegoat. So unwanted feelings got projected. So that's the type of trauma that I work with clients.
Could you
The
give an
families.
example of that projection that a parent could put upon their child?
Well, yeah, it's very a memory is coming to mind.
Yeah.
This was when I were a young adult. Oh, no, this is actually during the time I was hospitalized. So it's very subtle, especially like covert narcissistic emotional abuse can be very subtle. And so an example of a conversation I remember having at the table with my grandparents, my paternal grandparents there is my mom made a comment that the therapist, the psychologist that was working with me, was a very attractive woman. She was quite beautiful. And my Nana said, like Karen is. And my mom said, well, I don't know about that. And so that is an example, which I didn't even understand at the time. I just knew I felt bad. Like I felt depressed, right? Like all of this is in hindsight from my healing and putting the pieces together. But that's a very covert, sounds, but it's a way of like when parents have unprocessed trauma themselves, especially a shame-based wound, and they're not working with it and they're unaware, they can even unintentionally project their unwanted feelings, especially onto a child that is highly sensitive, that's highly emotionally attuned.
Dan and I were
Yeah.
speaking about the same thing, the exact same thing before we could come on. 100%, I agree.
Yeah, yeah.
So
It reminds me of one thing of the book that particular psychologist, that therapist worked with me a little bit longer until I went home for summer. But she gave me the book by Alice Miller called The Drama of the Gifted Child. It's also now, I think, called Prisoners of Childhood, but
mhm, yes.
that was a significant book in helping me understand and start to piece together why I was experiencing depression. Yeah, that book is, talking about a sensitive child where there is kind of this narcissistically injured mother not having her needs met, and how it kind of impacts particularly an emotionally sensitive child. And so that was a book that really has stayed with me through the years of starting to piece together what I was experiencing.
Then I'm thinking that the child can start to behave in meeting their parents' needs, right? Versus the opposite, which the parent A loving parent is supporting the development and unfolding of the uniqueness of their child and realizes their child is not themselves, right? But with that projection, right, the child can start to what? Eliminate their own self and try to be what the parent only wants them to become.
Absolutely. And that's some of what's talked about in the book, the false self versus the true
Yes.
self. So the false
Mhm.
self emerged for me that I was totally identified with. And that was this perfectionistic part, but it also was, how do I adapt, not have certain feelings? How do I mold myself to preserve the connection, the mother connection, in a way that to preserve the connection, I had to abandon myself. So that often happens when there's a sensitive, child with a mother that has her own unresolved trauma and kind of emotionally uses the child to kind of put her feelings into. And I think I knew when I was, I think, pretty young, that my mother was very threatened emotionally by any feelings I had. I think she even mentioned, like, well, when you went to kindergarten, some of the kids cried, but you didn't. And that led through my, experience of shutting down feelings. And then I couldn't cry, which is a sign of trauma, right?
Yes.
Shutting down. But I was highly attuned to my mother's emotional states and how much she needed me to not feel because it threatened her. Or it was a very narrow in terms of what was expected, right? Not too happy, but definitely not. But this dates back to, toddler. Like I just kind of, I think, intuitively knew. And that is true even today. Very uncomfortable with feeling.
It's interesting how through life, sometimes those early wounds, right, especially when there's healing of them going on, that wound can lead to also our greatest strength, right? Your empathy and attunement can be great skills as a therapist. I wanted to ask you, with the depression, there can be what's called unipolar depression, a clinical depression by definition of the DSM-5, and you name some of the symptoms. It would be at least 2 weeks of a certain array of symptoms. That's unipolar depression. And depression can also be part of a bipolar disorder, which could either be hypomania with repeated depressions or mania with depressions. There can also be psychotic symptoms related to depression or psychotic symptoms associated with bipolar. What happened for you? It seems like it started off with a major depression. How did it continue to evolve, or did it continue to evolve?
Yes, it did. I would say, yeah, in my teen years and 20s, it was more depressive, clinically, depressive episodes. But I will say that I did have a wide swing in moods starting in high school that were, I think, pretty noticeable. I think maybe it was a little bit of hypomania, even, right? Like just kind of more kind of energy, but I definitely, it was hard for me to be in that band of just resilience that, like it was either kind of shut down or it was highly goal oriented. The achiever part was like, on. So I can look back and see the mood swings. And then, ultimately it has, landed for me on probably bipolar one, maybe even bipolar 2, even maybe bipolar 1, where I've had drastic, lows, like a bipolar 1 depression after being like hypomanic to manic is really low. It's really contrasted to that experience of being hypomanic to manic. And, in later years, I did go off some medication, and that's when it was clear too. I had a full blown kind of manic episode and a lot of like grandiose kind of thinking. My sleep is the first sign that gets disrupted, right? Working on projects, into the night. And yeah, grandiose thinking. Yeah, inflated kind of self-esteem. I mean, it's definitely a state that's contrasted to the depressed state.
I know that some symptoms from my experience as a psychiatrist of meeting, men and women with bipolar disorder, what there can be that grandiosity could be the sky high, right? Almost what delusional in nature. Quitting a job because I have the cure for cancer, right? Traveling across the country to visit someone who doesn't even know me. Okay.
Yeah.
There can be what? Talking literally a mile a minute, talking so fast, right? So fast that you may be jumping from idea to idea, it's not making any sense. I've even read that people can start to rhyme their words or pun their words in a state of mania. Not to be clever, they're just kind of doing it in that manic state. Then there can also be hypersexuality, right? Just sleeping around or doing things differently sexually that what one previously didn't do, totally out of one's character, spending money running up your credit cards. I met a woman that had gone bankrupt related to being in a manic state. And all the while, the person does not know something is wrong. And that is so shocking in a way, because, right? Because the person observing that person, oh my God, there's something terribly wrong. But the person experiencing it does not. And also, there could be rapid cycling of up and down of the mood, and there could be mixed episodes. The person's laughing, crying, joking, angry. Their mood is just like jello going back and forth. Does any of those symptoms resonate with you? And only feel comfortable with what you want to share.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. One thing, the hyperverbal. I mean, so talking, fast, talking quickly. I remember so long ago, but being in a manic state, I mean, I would talk to everyone. So I just remember now little bits, but I was at the gas station and gentleman got out of the car and I'm telling him that I'm going to be in a movie that's going to be produced by Tyler Perry because
Oh
my
my
dad
goodness.
scary and that it's going to have my story in it and I'm telling them bits and and I'll see you on the big screen and
Yeah, and none of this is true, right? That was part of
oh,
your
no, definitely
grandiose thinking.
that was yeah, I just thought that
I'm a
my
movie
mental
star.
journey was gonna yeah, it was gonna lead to kind of a movie about my life and that
Yes.
Tyler Perry was gonna produce it. But just talking incessantly and talking to everyone. This is at a gas station. I mean, I think the guy, who knows what he thought, but so the hyperverbal, talking to everyone, the grandiosity. And I will say that the reckless behavior or behavior that's not typical when you're in an episode, for example, one is the money. So I've been in thousands of dollars of credit card debt related to being in a manic episode. And what I will say is, like you were saying at the end, when I kind of like came, through the episode, it's like you come to in dealing with the consequences of what you
Yes.
do when you're in a manic episode. That will take you down in depression, or that's what happened for me, like no other. Because it was almost as if I was kidnapped from my own life. I had all of this excessive spending. So I mean, thousands of dollars of credit card debt. And when you come to having to deal with the consequences, like like in terms of monetarily and emotionally what happened, then it's catapulted down to a severe bipolar depression. And yeah, I felt like I was kidnapped at times and then put back into my life. And I'm like, it's just all in, shambles.
But the way that you described it, Karen, it makes me feel so sad that because it's an apt description that the bipolar psychiatric illness, right? It's not about your personality, it's not your character. It's an absolute illness was causing you to behave in ways that you were not consciously, in a sense, purposefully doing these things. It was the illness doing it. And now you
Yeah.
have to live with the consequence.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
terrible,
Yeah.
horrible, right?
Yeah.
All the
Those
more reason for people to be aware of mental health, illness, disorder, warning signs, and treatment, because there is treatment and effective treatment for major depression, bipolar disorder, OCD, which can be a combination of medication treatment as appropriate and psychological therapies, as well as integration of the arts.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There was something you said about that, but like feeling, like a source of sadness that, I can have more compassion now too for even my different, younger parts that have kind of gone through this and coming back and finding your way through, because usually the manic will lead to the level of depression. As high as you go is as low as you go oftentimes, right? So when I've gone high, and I've gone quite high, even to psychosis of religious nature, then the profound depression that kind of ensues. And I think finding your way through that, and then what you did when you were up here is it's a dark night of the soul, right? And so that's, the high risk of suicide for individuals that have a complex interplay between relational trauma and a mood disorder, bipolar. It's very complex. And that's the women I work with today have a complex interweaving of childhood trauma in the form of relational trauma and a mood disorder.
And in a sense, you're right to underscore the complexity of it, right? Because on the one hand, the mood disorder, whether that be depression, bipolar disorder, can have physical illness, treatment with medication. There's also the psychological development of the child, right? And how their needs have been met, and the mental health skills that they've either developed through help with their parents or not developed, right? So there's the psychotherapy part, right? And what you're talking about, basic attachment needs, right? As a baby, we need the parent, right?
Yeah.
And the parent is going to help shape us, at least initially. And without that as the security of that, right? I'm almost visualizing literally the baby in the parent's arms, right? And the parent being attuned to the baby, right? Not necessarily initially the baby being attuned to the parent, right? That
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense. It's supposed to be the parent being attuned, and the impact that that can have on us. So it is complex, right? It's an interplay of the two.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
complex. Yeah, definitely. I do think there's a correlation. I'd have to look at the research between those who have had attachment ruptures and relational trauma early on and being diagnosed later with a mood disorder, either depression or
Mhm.
bipolar. I think there's a
Yes.
pretty strong correlation between the two. Yeah, yeah,
Then you can add in, for some individuals, turning to substances to, in an immediate sense, help with their mood, and then developing a substance abuse alcohol addiction added to the mix.
yes, yeah.
So,
Which will too.
Join in. What are your thoughts?
Karen, I want to use this opportunity with you to educate teens about bipolar. But I'm also going to throw teachers into the packet and family into the packet. Now, you in your 50s, so it's a while back, when you were a teenager. But I still honestly feel that the subject of bipolar in the educational system is still a topic that nobody really understands. It's like if I'm a teen in school now, I don't know that I got bipolar until I get diagnosed. The teacher doesn't really know how to handle that situation. What would you say in your experience that you wish you knew your teachers knew, or your friends knew, or your family knew about bipolar?
Yeah, I just think in terms of what I wish they had known. It's complex because developmentally in our teen years, like there's hormonal changes, and so there is more of a variation in mood. But I think being attuned to the emotional states, and if there is like severe mood swings, having an adult, whether or not it's someone within the family of origin, but to connect with that person in a way which I wish I had had to have them understand kind of the emotional suffering of what's happening, right? Like kind of a lifeline in terms of a connection. Yeah, because sometimes I think the painful thing is for me, it went kind of unnoticed. I remember writing a lot in English school in my journal, like, why am I suicidal and my family is perfect? There was nothing to like I said, it wasn't like I had a parent commit suicide, an alcoholic, or, so, but I was suffering extremely emotionally. And so I think just kind of some education too, like for teachers, like you're saying, Kino, and kind of adults around some of the symptoms and linking and having that connection, that emotional connection, whether or not that's in therapy or, some kind of mentor, but understanding too the suffering that the individual is emotionally going through with these vacillations in mood. And it's very common to have the suicidal thinking and ideation and suicide attempts with a bipolar kind of diagnosis.
Yeah. So here's Professor Kino now sitting in school. Okay, I got 50 students in the class. Besides mood swings, what signs can Professor Kino look for in his students to say, hey, okay, something is not right here. Let me take a deep dive into what's happening with the student, because the student doesn't know better. They haven't been diagnosed yet, but I can see certain things. What are those things that I can look out for as a teacher?
I think it would be twofold. One, if there's a marked difference in terms of like showing signs of depression, right? So a change in grades, a shutting down, being more withdrawn, not turning in assignments, of suicidal ideation comments, like I just don't care, apathy, anhedonia. Well, I want to keep it to the classroom, So for a marked change in terms of like starting to talk a lot, be more ostentatious, kind of in like hyperverbal. I'm trying to think, Diane, what might be some other signs like in a teen for like hypomania that would be visible to a teacher or professor?
I think you've touched on some of them. The talking more quickly. There could be. This is all in comparison to a baseline, right? So it's a
Yeah.
switch from what a
Yes.
baseline is. So the
Yes.
person's talking more, they're interrupting more, or they don't usually interrupt. Now they're interrupting. That maybe they're making inappropriate comments, sexualized comments, whereas it's inappropriate. They would never do something like that before. The person going, this could be either side of the spectrum. They're missing classes. Missing classes could be related to being depressed. It could be missing classes because they're so distracted, right? And they're forgetting in a sense that they need to go to class. I would say if they're handing in their assignments, and you already mentioned, I think, Karen, they're missing their assignments, but let's say they're handing in their assignments and they're disorganized or they're not really making sense. Right.
Yeah.
And also, I think, again, this can be difficult for a teacher with very many students, but sometimes you can pick up on body language. The person just doesn't look the same in terms of being vacant looking or sad looking or tearful. Or on the hypomanic manic side, it could be that they're all jazzed up and maybe they're even physically having a hard time sitting still.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
those are some things, to pay
Yeah.
attention to.
Thinking too, like when you said like homework, turning in homework. So I know when I've been more manic, like my writing is just much more chaotic. So it's a marked change from where the student would be at baseline. It's like, wow, what's happening with this like, I mean, my writing gets just chaotic in my journal and I have so much going on because there's like this is an amazing hypomanic to manic episode. I have so many thoughts. It's like racing thoughts. And so to get them
Yes.
down on the page, right? So made me think of
There's also
that.
the content of what the person's writing.
That- Yeah, could also be an indicator for a professor that what's happening for this person.
A lot of the examples that you and Anna mentioned, yeah, is reminding me of myself growing up, right? And because I was a rebellious teenager, I'm open about it. I'm honest about it on all the shows I'm on. That's how we build connection with our audience. Now I'm thinking to myself, Kino, did you have bipolar? Because now there seems to be a fine line between bipolar and being rebellious. Because a lot of what you have mentioned now is like, me being rebellious at school. But now a teacher will just take it as Kino is just being naughty. Kino is being Kino again, send him to the principal's office. Meanwhile, it is bipolar. It's a mental disorder, but nobody has realized it yet or picked up on it. And
Yeah.
that, there for me, can be a concern.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a
I
good point, because I think, you know, I would like to see more psychoeducation within the school system around identifying, because it in that example, or like, what you shared, it can easily be dismissed, especially in the teen years, right? And it might be that there is, like just this more kind of rebellious part that's, navigating whatever, you were navigating, or the student is navigating. But, to nuance it down, what's happening, even if it was just like rebellious, like what's happening, that this rebellious kind of disruptive
Yeah.
kind of energy
Yeah.
is coming in, but really not being so quick to just be like, oh, to dismiss, just send them to the right. And I think that can come through more psychoeducation for the professors, for teachers, those in our school system.
Yeah, yeah. No, you used a good word there. We tend to just dismiss it. It's the
Yeah.
easiest way out. Yeah, so I know we don't have a lot of time. Just one more question. What would you say, based on your experience since a teen, to a teenager right now listening to the show, or any piece of content we create from the show, who's just been diagnosed, they're scared, they're alone, they're confused? What would your advice be to them right
I think that my initial advice, that there is always hope. There's always hope for healing and finding a different way. And hope can stand for hold on, pain ends. And establishing some kind of connection, whether that's with a counselor, a treatment person, a mentor that is supportive and kind of, you know, to help the person. I think one thing, especially for teens, and one thing that has been helpful for me later in life is art journaling. And I have, when I've worked with adolescents, introducing them when they have a mood disorder or complex trauma to art journaling. And basically, that's a visual diary. I mean, you can take watercolors, mix markers, you can express how you're feeling on the page and then write about it, right? That creativity for me was a lifeline. It was one of my important lifelines. And I know how hard it can be, especially if you're in a depressed, dark night of the soul, where it feels like the only way out of the emotional pain is suicide. And that's like, the message in your songs, Dr. Diana, is, hold on, there is hope, lift you up. So it's reaching out for connection and, art journaling. But my belief is that, there's always hope for healing. There's always hope for healing. And actually, that makes me think of one of the things I do in my therapeutic coaching program is we create a heart. So this is a heart that says heart healing, and basically it's filled with a lot of symbolism, like a white feather, a heart crystal, and messages that speak to the truth of who I am, because trauma promotes false beliefs about our worth. And so, for example, I'm a failure, or, like we can have those trauma promotes those types of negative beliefs about ourselves. And so this is filled with truths about who I am. So just, I think the biggest thing is there's always hope for healing. I've been through so much in my journey, but there's always healing, and there's light on the other side if you don't give up.
Karen, how beautiful that you've taken your life and written this fantastic, wonderful book. And can you tell us more about your book?
Sure. So my book is Heart Healing for Radiant Living, and it's Be the Best Version of You, 1 week at a time. So it's 52 weeks of creative art prompts for healing your heart. And I use the HEART acronym. So H stands for Heal Your Heart with Art. So there's an art prompt for every week. E is Express Yourself with Music and Movement. So there's songs and different movements and dance for each week. A is affirmations for intentional thought creation. This is the power of our thoughts and our beliefs that we hold on our well-being. So there's affirmations for 52 weeks. R is the ritual of writing and journaling, and there's journal prompts and writing prompts in terms of your healing journey for emotional health. And T is thankfulness and a gratitude practice. And the power, there's so much research on the power of gratitude, even if it's, yeah, and that can counter some of the depressive kind of energy. So, and then in the back, and the forward is by Dr. Diane Kaufman, who is hosting. And then in the back is 6 bonus chapters, and it's on like loss and grief and creative expression, substance use and creative expression, anxiety and depression and creative expression, trauma and suicide prevention. So those are my more clinical chapters that are bonus chapters in the book. So that's a little bit
How
about my.
It's so fantastic and such a gift to the world, Karen. How can our audience purchase the book?
The book is on Amazon. So right now, that's the best place. So if you go to Amazon and you go to Heart Healing, the ART is capitalized for art healing. So it's basically healing through art. Heart Healing for Radiant Living.
What is your website or the way that we can learn more about you?
KarenCorona.com.
Well, I know Kino and I very much want to thank you for coming on today. Right? I think it takes courage and a special person to share their authentic experiences, and in sharing them, I think you've helped so many people, Karen. So thank you.
Thank you. With gratitude, Kino, for you and your questions and being here, and for you, Diana. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here and start to share a little bit of my story.
Thanks
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
Karen. Goodbye.
Thank you, Karen. Appreciate you. Bye.